The courtroom was silent as the doors slammed open. The two police officers, who had just dragged a man in handcuffs across the room, froze in their tracks. Their faces drained of color when the man they had humiliated was calmly unshackled by the bailiff, and then stood tall, his hands raised with a quiet authority. Everyone in the room stared in disbelief. The officer who had pushed the man forward now looked like he was going to collapse. "Excuse me," the man said, his voice calm, but laced with a terrifying undertone. "You've just dragged me into a federal courtroom, and you've got no idea who I am, do you?" The officers swallowed hard, their eyes darting to one another, unsure of what to do next. It was the moment when the truth dawned on them, and all the color in their faces disappeared. You're... One of the officers stammered, his voice quivering with fear. "Yes," the man replied slowly, with a hint of a smile forming. "I am the head of the United States Secret Service." The room was stunned into an eerie silence. A few people gasped, some looking at the police officers, who now realized they had made the biggest mistake of their lives. A low murmur rippled through the crowd, and the officers' faces turned bright red with embarrassment and fear. They hadn't just arrested anyone. This was a man with access to the highest levels of security in the country. A few moments passed before one of the officers tried to regain his composure, but it was too late. They were in deep trouble. It wasn't just about the wrong man. They had dragged the wrong man to court, and now they were about to pay for their mistake in a way they never imagined. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. As the officer tried to speak, the man didn't wait for him to finish. "You will be hearing from the highest authorities very soon," he said, his voice colder than a winter storm. "And you better hope your badges are enough to save you." The officers stood there, stunned and speechless, as the rest of the courtroom remained in utter shock. Let me take you back to a few hours earlier, when none of this seemed even remotely possible. It was a typical Thursday morning in Washington, D.C. The sun had just begun to peek over the skyline, and the streets were already busy. People in suits rushed past, sipping coffee or carrying briefcases, and the hum of traffic filled the air. For most, it was just another regular day in the Capitol, where political drama played out like clockwork and life went on, seemingly without a hitch. At the local precinct, Officer Thompson sat at his desk, scrolling through his phone, half paying attention to the morning briefing. His partner, Officer Rodriguez, was standing by the window, staring out at the busy street below. Neither of them had any idea that their day was about to take a drastic turn, one that would alter their careers, their lives, and their perception of the law forever. Officer Thompson clicked on a news headline about a recent series of high-profile robberies in the city. Just as he was about to go into a detailed analysis of the article, his phone buzzed with an incoming call. He glanced at the screen, saw it was from Lieutenant Henderson, and quickly answered. "Thompson, Rodriguez." The voice on the other end crackled. "We need you on a quick assignment. There's a man who was spotted in a nearby park, and we've received a tip that he's connected to some shady dealings." Thompson raised an eyebrow. "A shady character, huh? What's his name?" "Doesn't matter," Henderson replied quickly. "We've got eyes on him. He's known to associate with some bad people. Go take a look, but be discreet. This could be big, so we don't want to mess it up." Without questioning the orders, Thompson hung up and turned to his partner. "Rodriguez, you ready?" Rodriguez gave a nod. "Let's go." The two officers grabbed their gear and headed out the door, the excitement of a potential bust buzzing in their veins. They jumped into their patrol car and cruised through the morning traffic. The sun was now fully up, casting long shadows on the streets. It didn't take long for them to arrive at the park, a quiet place surrounded by tall trees. The park seemed almost too peaceful, but Thompson knew better. The tip had come in for a reason. They parked their car a few blocks away and walked the rest of the way, blending in with joggers and dog walkers. They were careful, looking around for any sign of unusual activity. They didn't expect to find anything too serious, just a person who might be in the wrong place at the wrong time. But as they rounded a corner near the benches, their eyes locked on a man sitting alone, reading a newspaper. It was the man they were looking for. He had dark hair, a calm demeanor, and didn't seem to notice the officers approaching. Thompson nudged Rodriguez, signaling that they should approach him quietly. As they got closer, they could hear snippets of the man's conversation, though it wasn't clear who he was speaking to. Rodriguez gave Thompson a questioning look, but Thompson just motioned for him to stay calm. They were close now. The man wasn't wearing anything out of the ordinary, but there was something in the way he sat, too still, too composed for someone who wasn't expecting to be under surveillance. Thompson took a deep breath. "Let's go." They approached the man from behind. "Sir," Thompson said as he stepped into the man's line of sight, "we need to ask you a few questions." The man lowered the newspaper slowly, his gaze locking with the officers. It was then that Thompson realized something wasn't right. The man didn't seem scared. He didn't seem surprised. In fact, he looked completely unbothered. Thompson could see the hint of a smirk. Before either officer could say another word, the man stood up quickly, knocking the bench over in the process. His hand shot to the waistband of his pants, and for a split second, Thompson thought the man was reaching for a weapon. The officers tensed, ready for anything. But the man didn't draw a weapon. Instead, he threw a business card on the ground between them. Thompson and Rodriguez exchanged confused glances. The man calmly watched as the card fluttered to the ground, and then spoke in a voice that carried authority far beyond anything Thompson expected. "I am the head of the United States Secret Service," he said, his voice calm but unmistakable. "You've just made a terrible mistake." And that was when the world seemed to stop spinning. Thompson and Rodriguez stared at each other, their brains struggling to comprehend what they had just heard. They had been trained for every scenario under the sun, but not this one. Their next steps would determine whether they would survive the nightmare they had just walked into. Thompson stood frozen for a moment, trying to make sense of what was happening. His mind raced as he stared at the man standing in front of him, the business card still lying on the ground between them. It wasn't just any card. It was sleek, embossed with the unmistakable seal of the United States Secret Service. The golden letters glinted in the morning sun, but they didn't provide any comfort. Instead, they sent a chill through Thompson's spine. "Sir, please," Thompson stammered, trying to regain some composure. "We're just doing our job here. If you're who you say you are, we didn't mean any harm." Rodriguez, still standing beside him, was equally unsure of how to proceed. He glanced at Thompson, then back at the man. This was no ordinary arrest. This was far above their pay grade. The man didn't seem angry, though. He remained eerily calm, as though he had expected this situation to unfold in just this way. The smirk that had been on his face earlier was gone now, replaced by an unreadable expression. "I'm sure you didn't," the man said, his voice quiet but firm. "But you've made a mistake. A big one. Do you know who I am?" Thompson took a deep breath. His mind was still processing the shock. "You already told us," he replied. "You're the head of the Secret Service." The man's lips curled into a small smile. "Yes, I am. But you still don't understand the full implications of what you've done." Rodriguez shifted nervously, glancing around as though hoping someone might show up to help them navigate this mess. But there was no backup. No one was around. It was just the three of them in this quiet corner of the park. "What should we do now?" Rodriguez finally asked, his voice trembling. The man's gaze softened for a brief moment, almost as though he was considering giving them a chance to back down. But then, without warning, he spoke again. "Call your supervisor. Tell them who I am. They'll understand why you shouldn't have touched me. But know this, you're in serious trouble." Thompson's stomach dropped. He had worked in law enforcement long enough to know when a situation was beyond his control, and this one had quickly spiraled out of hand. He pulled out his radio, his hands shaking slightly as he tried to make contact with the precinct. "Thompson to dispatch," he said into the mic, his voice more strained than he wanted to admit. "We've got a situation here. We need immediate backup, and I need to speak with Lieutenant Henderson. It's urgent." The man's eyes never left him. "I wouldn't bother," he said calmly. "This is much bigger than you realize." Thompson pressed his lips together. He couldn't ignore the man's words, but at the same time, he couldn't just let the situation slide. It was his job to follow orders. But what if the orders were wrong? What if they had just messed with the wrong person? As he waited for Henderson to respond, Rodriguez bent down and picked up the business card, examining it closely. He turned it over in his hands, as if he expected it to reveal some hidden secret. But nothing changed. It was just a card, and it wasn't much help in understanding the nightmare they had just stepped into. A few moments later, the radio crackled to life. "Thompson, what's going on over there?" Henderson's voice came through, sharp and demanding. Thompson didn't hesitate. "Lieutenant, we've got a situation here. The man we've just approached, he says he's the head of the Secret Service. His card checks out." There was a brief silence on the other end of the line, and then Henderson responded with a tone that made Thompson's heart race. "Get out of there, Thompson, and don't speak to him again. Do not engage. I'll send backup, but you need to stay calm and wait for instructions." Before Thompson could reply, the line went dead. His fingers hovered over the radio, unsure of what to do next. The man in front of them, still standing tall and unmoving, was clearly watching them both. He seemed to know what was going on, his eyes flicking to the radio as if he could read Thompson's thoughts. "You're in over your head," the man said, his voice low but clear. "I didn't want to cause trouble, but now you've made me do this. You've put both of us in a very complicated position." Thompson couldn't breathe. The weight of the situation was starting to sink in. The man wasn't just some stranger they had stumbled upon. He was a powerful figure with the ability to destroy their careers with a single word. If he wanted to, he could have them both arrested on charges they couldn't even begin to comprehend. Rodriguez finally spoke up, his voice trembling. "What do you want from us?" The man didn't immediately respond. Instead, he turned his gaze upward, watching a plane fly across the sky. After a long pause, he spoke again, his voice softer this time. "I'm not here to punish you. I'm not here to ruin your lives. But you need to understand something. You're not the ones in charge here. You're just following orders. And sometimes that's not enough. Sometimes the people giving those orders don't know the bigger picture." This was one of those times. Thompson's mind was reeling. He had heard whispers of corruption, of police overreach, of miscommunications within the department. But never had he imagined that it would be a matter of crossing paths with the head of the Secret Service. "I want you to think carefully," the man continued, his gaze locking with Thompson's. "You've got a choice. You can walk away, and I'll make sure this never happens again. Or you can continue to press, and I promise you, your lives will never be the same." Thompson opened his mouth to respond, but before he could say anything, the sound of sirens echoed in the distance. It wasn't backup. No, it was something else entirely. The man's expression darkened, and he turned on his heel, moving quickly towards the exit of the park. "You've got one chance," he called back over his shoulder. Thompson and Rodriguez exchanged a glance, panic rising in their chests. And then it happened. From the far side of the park, a black SUV screeched to a halt. The doors flew open, and a team of agents, all dressed in dark suits and sunglasses, flooded out. Their eyes were trained on the officers, their hands already hovering over their holsters. The officers were completely out of their depth. They knew that this wasn't just a mistake anymore. This was something much bigger than they could ever have imagined. Thompson's pulse raced. They had just made the worst mistake of their careers, and they had no idea what would happen next. The agents surrounding them were like shadows, their presence both imposing and intimidating. They moved with a precision that left no room for doubt. They were professionals. The officers, Thompson and Rodriguez, were just regular law enforcement, out of their depth, completely unprepared for the chaos unfolding before them. The man they had just approached, the head of the Secret Service, had vanished into the crowd, blending in with the team of agents. Thompson's mind raced. What had just happened? The sirens were still blaring in the distance, but these agents were far more serious than any backup they could have called. They had no idea where this was going, but they were quickly becoming players in something much larger than a simple routine stop. One of the agents, a tall man with a sharp jawline and dark sunglasses, stepped forward and fixed his gaze on Thompson. There was no warmth in his eyes, no understanding of the situation, just cold, calculated authority. "Officers," the agent said, his voice flat, "I need you to step back. We're handling this from here." Thompson opened his mouth to speak, but before he could get a word out, the agent's cold eyes cut him off. "You're in the way," the agent added. "If you don't want this to escalate, I suggest you move." Rodriguez took a step back, his heart hammering in his chest. He wasn't the one to back down in a confrontation. But this was something else entirely. They were clearly out of their league, and he could feel it deep in his gut. He looked at Thompson, who seemed to be trying to hold it together, but his face had gone pale. "We didn't know," Thompson finally said, his voice shaky. "We were just doing our job." The agent didn't react. He simply motioned for them to step aside, his hand resting casually on his holster. It was a gesture that left no room for argument. Thompson and Rodriguez exchanged a brief, uncertain glance before they reluctantly stepped back, allowing the agents to take control. The SUV had parked near the entrance of the park, and now it was surrounded by black sedans and armored vehicles. The whole situation was surreal. It was like they were in the middle of some secret operation, far beyond their pay grade. The noise of the park, the birds chirping, the quiet rustling of leaves, it all seemed to fade into the background as the reality of their mistake set in. Rodriguez, still shaken, spoke up quietly. "What now?" Thompson didn't answer immediately. His mind was too full of questions, too full of confusion. They had been doing their job, following their orders, and yet somehow, they had stepped into a world they weren't prepared for. Before Thompson could respond, one of the agents turned to them. "We'll be taking over from here," the agent said, his voice stern. "Do not speak about what you've seen here. If you do, we'll make sure your careers are over. Understand?" Thompson nodded stiffly, swallowing the lump in his throat. It wasn't a threat, it was a warning, and he could tell by the agent's cold stare that this wasn't an empty promise. Rodriguez glanced at the ground, clearly defeated. His usual confidence was gone, replaced by the fear of what might happen next. What had they gotten themselves into? The agents moved swiftly, communicating with each other in low tones. It was clear they had a plan, but what that plan was, Thompson couldn't even begin to guess. Meanwhile, the head of the Secret Service, the man who had calmly revealed his identity and sent them into a panic, had disappeared into the crowd of agents. His presence was no longer a concern, at least, not immediately. The real danger now was the unknown. Thompson couldn't shake the feeling that they had just been pawns in a much larger game. They were no longer in control of their own fate. They were at the mercy of these agents, and the person they had just encountered. "We need to get out of here," Thompson muttered, as much to himself as to Rodriguez. Rodriguez didn't reply, but he nodded, his face grim. They both knew they were caught in the web now, and there was no easy way out. The next move was no longer in their hands. It wasn't long before they received the call. The voice on the other end of the line was familiar, Lieutenant Henderson, but this time, his tone was different. It wasn't the usual calm, composed voice Thompson was used to hearing. It was urgent, clipped. "Thompson, Rodriguez, get back to the precinct. Now, you're going to want to hear this." They exchanged a glance, fear and confusion clouding their expressions. What could be so urgent now? They had just been threatened by federal agents, and now they were being told to come back to the precinct? They didn't waste any time. Within minutes, they were back in their patrol car, speeding toward the station, the gravity of the situation sinking in with every passing mile. "What do you think this is about?" Rodriguez asked, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. "I don't know," Thompson replied, his voice strained. "But it's not good. I can feel it. Something's happening, and we're caught right in the middle of it." Rodriguez stayed silent, his mind racing. He wasn't used to feeling this way, helpless, out of control, but he knew Thompson was right. This wasn't just a mistake. It was a setup, and whatever happened next, it would change everything. They arrived at the precinct, and the air inside was thick with tension. Lieutenant Henderson was waiting for them, his face tight with stress. He didn't waste any time on pleasantries. "Thompson, Rodriguez, sit down. You've got a lot to answer for," he said, his voice low but firm. Thompson opened his mouth to speak, but Henderson held up a hand. "I've just received a call from the higher-ups. They know about what happened this morning, and they're not happy. You two made a serious mistake. And now, we're all in deep trouble." Rodriguez looked at Thompson, his stomach sinking. This was far worse than they had thought. They hadn't just messed with the wrong person. They had inadvertently set off a chain of events that no one could have predicted. Henderson sat down across from them, his expression grave. The man you encountered in the park, the one who claimed to be the head of the Secret Service, he's not just anyone. He's involved in something much bigger than we realized. And now, you two are entangled in it. Thompson's pulse quickened. He had a sinking feeling he wasn't going to like where this conversation was headed. Henderson leaned in, his voice dropping even lower. They've already sent someone to look into your backgrounds. And if there's even a hint that you're involved in anything at all, there will be consequences. And those consequences won't just end with your careers. Thompson could barely breathe. He had no idea how far this went, but it was clear now. This wasn't just about a bad arrest. It was about something much bigger. And whatever it was coming for them. The silence in the room was deafening. Thompson and Rodriguez sat there, their minds racing as Lieutenant Henderson's words sunk in. Their careers, their lives, everything they had worked for, was hanging by a thread. And the worst part was that they had no idea what they had gotten themselves into. Henderson's eyes never left them, watching for their reaction. He could see the fear in their eyes. He knew they didn't fully grasp the situation, but he wasn't about to sugarcoat it. They had crossed a line they couldn't uncross. Let me be clear, Henderson continued, his voice colder than before. The man you encountered in the park, the one who identified himself as the head of the Secret Service, his real name is Marcus Blackwell. He's not just some government official. He's deeply involved in something much bigger than anything either of you could imagine. Rodriguez shifted uneasily in his seat. What exactly are you talking about, Lieutenant? Henderson leaned back in his chair, his hands folding in front of him. Blackwell has ties to a covert operation, one that goes back years. No one in this department, or in any other agency, has been able to crack it. It's been buried so deep that even some of the highest-ranking officials don't know all the details. But what we do know is that it's connected to corruption at the highest levels of government. Thompson's heart skipped a beat. He had heard rumors about corruption in the force, in the system itself, but he never thought it was anything more than just whispers. Now, sitting in that room, hearing Henderson speak about it so matter-of-factly, everything he thought he knew about the world seemed to crumble. You two were just pawns in a much larger game, Henderson said, his voice almost too calm for the gravity of the situation. But the problem is, you don't know what game you've stepped into. And right now, there's no way out. Thompson's head swam. What does that mean for us? What happens next? Henderson's gaze darkened. It means that you're both in danger. Blackwell has eyes everywhere. And now that you've been involved, they'll be watching you. You'll be a target. Rodriguez shifted in his seat, his voice rising slightly in frustration. So what? We're just supposed to sit here and do nothing? Is that what you're telling us? Henderson's eyes narrowed. You can't do anything, Rodriguez. Nothing that won't make things worse. The best thing you can do right now is lay low, stay out of sight, and hope that this blows over. I've already pulled some strings to keep you both out of further trouble. But that's as far as I can go. Thompson sat there, his mind reeling. He had been a cop for years. He had taken on dangerous situations before. But this was something completely different. They weren't dealing with criminals on the street anymore. They were dealing with a system that was so corrupted, so entrenched in power, that even the most seasoned officers had no chance of making a dent in it. Is there anything we can do? Thompson asked, his voice barely above a whisper. He couldn't just let this go. He had to know if there was a way out. If there was any hope of clearing their names. Henderson stared at him for a long moment before responding. The only way out is if you keep your mouth shut and let things unfold the way they're going to unfold. You keep your heads down, you keep quiet, and you don't get involved in any more of this mess. You're in the deep end now, and the only thing that'll keep you afloat is silence. Thompson swallowed hard. He didn't like the idea of hiding, of pretending nothing was happening. But what other choice did they have? What were they supposed to do? This wasn't something they could fight. It was bigger than them, bigger than anything they had ever faced. Rodriguez slammed his fist down on the table, frustration boiling over. So we're just supposed to wait for someone else to fix this? Wait until it blows up in our faces? Henderson's face softened slightly, but the resolve in his voice remained. Sometimes, doing nothing is the only way to survive. It's not about fixing things right now. It's about surviving long enough to figure out what the hell is really going on. Because, Trust me, this isn't just about you two anymore. It's about something far bigger. And you don't want to get caught in the crossfire." For a moment, no one spoke. The weight of the conversation hung in the air, suffocating. Thompson and Rodriguez sat there, staring at the table, processing what Henderson had said. It was clear they had no control over what was happening. They had been caught in the middle of something monstrous, and the only way out was to stay quiet. Suddenly, Thompson's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, seeing a message from an unknown number. His stomach turned. "Meet me at the usual spot. 10 p.m. Don't tell anyone. It's urgent." Thompson's eyes narrowed. He knew that number. It was from an old contact, someone he had worked with on a few off-the-record cases in the past. Someone who had information. Henderson saw the look on Thompson's face and immediately stiffened. "What is it?" he asked, his voice sharp. Thompson hesitated for a moment before showing the message to Henderson. "It's from an old source. They want to meet tonight. They said it's urgent." Henderson frowned, the lines on his forehead deepening. "You don't have time for this, Thompson. Whatever they're offering, it's probably just more trouble. Don't go. Forget the message." Thompson felt a surge of defiance. He knew Henderson was right. It wasn't smart to meet with anyone right now, not after what had just happened. But something inside him told him that this wasn't over. He couldn't let it go. They had already gotten themselves in too deep. "I have to go," Thompson said, his voice firm. "I don't know what's going on, but this is my chance to find out." Henderson let out a long sigh, clearly frustrated. "I can't stop you, Thompson, but you're playing with fire. And if you get burned, don't say I didn't warn you." Thompson stood up, his mind made up. This was a risk, a dangerous one, but he had to know more. If he didn't go, he would always wonder what might have been, what kind of mess they had stepped into. "I'm going. You can't stop me," he said, his voice carrying an edge of determination. Henderson's eyes narrowed, but he didn't try to stop him. "You're making a huge mistake," he muttered under his breath as Thompson turned to leave. Rodriguez stood up as well, his expression tense. "Are you sure about this, man?" Thompson gave him a hard look. "I have to know. This is bigger than just us now. We need answers." And with that, Thompson stepped out of the office and into the unknown, unaware of just how deep this rabbit hole went. The night was cooler than usual, and the streets of Washington, D.C. felt eerily quiet as Thompson drove toward the meeting spot. The city, normally buzzing with life even after dark, seemed to be holding its breath. The silence pressed against him like a weight, making his every decision feel more consequential. He glanced at the clock on the dashboard, 9:45 p.m. The meeting was in less than 15 minutes. Rodriguez had tried to talk him out of it. "Don't do this, man. It's too risky. You don't know who's behind that message. For all we know, it could be a trap, a setup." Thompson had ignored him. He had to know what was going on. He couldn't sit back and just wait for someone else to fix things. Not when everything was falling apart. He needed answers, and this contact might be the only person who could provide them. The car glided through the streets and the usual landmarks of the city. Monuments, buildings, and streets he had driven down countless times now seemed foreign to him. Nothing was as it seemed anymore. As Thompson approached the alleyway where the meeting was supposed to take place, his mind raced. Was he making a huge mistake? He couldn't afford to mess this up, but the thought of walking away from answers, from a chance to uncover the truth, felt unbearable. The alley was dark, lit only by a few dim streetlights at either end. His headlights illuminated the pavement ahead, casting long shadows on the ground. There was a rustling sound coming from a nearby dumpster, and Thompson's hand instinctively hovered over the door handle. He scanned the area, his instincts as a cop kicking in, but saw nothing out of the ordinary. He parked the car a few feet away from the alley's entrance and cut the engine. The sudden silence in the car was deafening. It was 9:59 p.m. The message had said 10 p.m. sharp. He had no choice now but to go forward. Thompson got out of the car and walked toward the alley. He tried to calm the nerves that had been building in his stomach ever since he received the message. He had been in tight spots before, but tonight felt different. This wasn't just about arresting criminals. This wasn't just about doing his job. This was personal now. The stakes were higher than they had ever been. As he reached the entrance to the alley, a figure stepped out of the shadows. Thompson's heart skipped a beat. The figure was tall, cloaked in a dark trench coat, and their face was obscured by the brim of a hat. "Thompson," the figure said, their voice low and gravelly. "You came. Who are you?" Thompson asked, his voice cautious, not wanting to show how much his nerves were getting the best of him. He couldn't afford to appear weak, not with the situation spiraling out of control. The figure stepped forward, and for a moment, Thompson thought they might remain a mystery. But then, the figure pulled back the hat, revealing a face that Thompson knew all too well: Serena Matthews, an investigative journalist who had been covering government corruption for years. "Serena?" Thompson said in disbelief. "What the hell are you doing here?" Serena's expression was unreadable. She glanced around quickly, ensuring no one was watching before stepping closer to Thompson. "You need to listen to me, and you need to listen carefully," she said, her voice urgent. "I don't have much time, and neither do you." Thompson narrowed his eyes. "What are you talking about? What's going on?" Serena took a deep breath, her eyes darting nervously to the shadows. "You've walked into something that's much bigger than either of us. The man you encountered today, the one who said he's the head of the Secret Service, Marcus Blackwell, he's not just some government official. He's part of a powerful syndicate that controls things far beyond what you can imagine." Thompson felt his blood run cold. He had suspected something big was at play, but hearing it confirmed in such a direct way sent a chill through his spine. He had thought he was just caught in a web of bureaucracy. But this was something else entirely. "What are you talking about?" Thompson asked, trying to process her words. "Are you telling me that Blackwell is a criminal? And what does that have to do with us?" Serena glanced around once more, her eyes sharp and quick. "Yes, Blackwell is involved in something criminal. He's tied to a network of elites, people who are using their power to manipulate everything from the police force to national security. And you, Thompson, you've been dragged into it. Everything that happened today, the Secret Service, the agents that surrounded you, that wasn't just an accident. You were targeted." Thompson shook his head. "Targeted? What do you mean?" Serena stepped closer, her voice now a whisper. "They've been watching you for a long time. You've been investigating things that are starting to get close to the truth, and now they're covering their tracks. They used you as a pawn in their game, hoping you'd back off. But now that you're here, you've made it clear that you won't stop. And that's why you need to be careful." Thompson's mind was spinning. He had always suspected there was more to the story, more to the corruption in the system, but never had he imagined it would go this deep. The Secret Service, federal agents, the elites in power, all of them were connected in a way he couldn't even begin to understand. "Why are you telling me all this?" Thompson asked, his voice hoarse. Serena's eyes softened slightly. "Because you're the only one who can stop them." Thompson stared at her, trying to make sense of what she had just said. "Stop them? How? I'm just one cop, Serena. What can I do against all that?" Serena took another deep breath, as if steeling herself. "You can expose them. The information I have, everything I've been working on, it's the key to bringing down their entire operation. But I can't do it alone. I need someone who knows how to navigate the system. I need you." Thompson felt a surge of doubt. His first instinct was to say no, to walk away and let the people in charge handle it. But something about Serena's words felt like the truth. The idea of backing down, of letting this corruption continue unchecked, gnawed at him. "I don't know if I can do this," Thompson said, his voice quiet. "I've seen how this system works. I've seen how it protects itself. It's too powerful." Serena shook her head, her face hardening. "That's exactly why we need to expose it. If you want to make sure this doesn't destroy everything you care about, if you want to keep your integrity, you have to help me. They won't stop until they've silenced everyone who knows the truth. And that includes you." Thompson took a step back, his mind racing. Everything Serena said was true. They were already watching him. The agents, the threats. The deeper they went into this, the more dangerous it became. But he couldn't just ignore it. He couldn't let it go. There was too much at stake now. He exhaled slowly, making a decision. "All right," he said, his voice steady but heavy. "I'm in. What do we do next?" Serena gave a sharp nod. Good. But you need to be careful. I've arranged for a meeting tomorrow. Someone on the inside who can help. But we'll need to be discreet. We can't trust anyone, especially not the people we've already encountered. They've got eyes everywhere. Thompson nodded, adrenaline starting to pump through his veins. The fight wasn't over. Not by a long shot. He was now a part of something much bigger than he ever thought possible, and there was no turning back. But as he turned to leave, a sudden thought hit him. Was Serena truly on his side? Or was there more to her story than she was letting on? Before he could dwell on it, a dark figure stepped out from the shadows, blocking his path. Thompson's heart dropped. It was one of the agents from the Secret Service. And this time, it wasn't just a warning. This was an ultimatum. Thompson, the agent said coldly, his eyes fixed on him. You've gone too far. And just like that, everything they had planned was about to come crashing down. Thompson's pulse raced as he locked eyes with the agent. The cold, calculating gaze of the man in front of him sent a shiver down his spine. The agent, dressed in a sharp suit and wearing dark sunglasses even in the low light of the alley, stepped closer, his posture menacing and purposeful. Did you really think you could just walk away from this? The agent asked, his voice low and threatening. Did you think you could just poke around, digging into things you don't understand, and face no consequences? Thompson felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He couldn't afford to show fear, not now. But it was hard to ignore the overwhelming sense that he was trapped, surrounded by forces far beyond his control. The agent's presence alone felt like a looming shadow, one that threatened to swallow him whole. Serena, standing beside Thompson, didn't flinch. She looked up at the agent with a calm but defiant expression. You've been following us for a while, haven't you? She said, her voice even, but the fire in her words unmistakable. How much longer were you planning on keeping us in the dark? The agent's lips curled into a small, almost amused smile. You think you have any control over this situation? You're not in charge here. Neither of you are. Thompson's mind raced. He could feel the tension in the air, the quiet hum of danger that seemed to vibrate from every direction. They were caught between two worlds, the world of law enforcement, which he had always known, and the much darker, far-reaching world of corruption and power that was now closing in around him. What do you want? Thompson asked, trying to keep his voice steady. You're not going to stop us from exposing this. You can't silence the truth. The agent didn't flinch. You don't know what you're dealing with. Blackwell isn't just a government official. He's the tip of the iceberg. And if you keep pushing, if you keep digging into things you don't understand, you won't make it out alive. Serena stepped forward, her eyes narrowing. What? You're threatening us now. Is that how you deal with things? With violence and intimidation? The agent's smile faded, replaced by a cold expression that sent a chill down Thompson's spine. You'll understand soon enough. The more you fight, the more you'll realize just how deep this goes. And when you finally get it, it'll be too late. Thompson clenched his fists, resisting the urge to lash out. He couldn't let fear take over now. He had come too far, and there was too much on the line. We're not backing down. We know what you're doing, and we're going to make sure it comes to light. The agent's eyes flicked to Serena, then back to Thompson, a look of disdain crossing his features. You're both fools. You'll never see it coming. You'll regret this. Thompson's heart pounded in his chest, but he refused to let it show. He wasn't about to be intimidated, not by this agent or anyone else. He wasn't going to let this go. The agent gave a curt nod, signaling for someone behind him. Thompson tensed, ready for whatever was coming next. But just before the agent could make a move, there was a sudden sound. A faint noise in the distance. Tires screeching against asphalt. A car pulling up quickly. The agent's expression shifted slightly, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. Before anyone could react, a sleek black SUV pulled into the alley, its headlights cutting through the darkness. The agent's demeanor shifted instantly, the calm, cold confidence turning into something more wary. The car's door opened, and out stepped a man dressed in a sharp suit, his posture as commanding as the agent's. But this was no ordinary government operative. This was someone who carried an undeniable presence, someone with authority and power. He looked at the agent and then at Thompson and Serena with a calculating gaze. The agent stepped aside, his expression suddenly more respectful. "Director," he said, his voice tight with a hint of unease. "Is there a problem here?" the new arrival asked, his voice smooth, but with a tone of command that sent a shiver down Thompson's spine. The man's eyes were cold and assessing as he looked at both Thompson and Serena, taking in every detail. Thompson didn't answer right away. The sudden appearance of this new figure, the director, seemed to shift the entire dynamic. The agent, who had been so threatening moments before, now seemed almost subservient to this person. Serena was the first to speak. "There's no problem. We're just getting acquainted with the way things work around here." The director's gaze turned to her, his expression unreadable. "I don't think you fully understand the situation you're in, Ms. Matthews." Thompson could sense that this man was not someone to be trifled with. He was calm, controlled, but there was something unsettling about the way he carried himself, like a predator waiting for the perfect moment to strike. "I understand the situation perfectly," Serena replied, her voice steady but with an edge. "I've been investigating for years. I know exactly what's happening here, and I won't stop until the truth comes out." The director regarded her for a long moment, then shifted his gaze to Thompson. "And you?" he asked, his voice quieter, more deliberate. "Do you fully understand what you're getting yourself into, Officer Thompson?" Thompson stood tall, trying to mask the unease creeping up inside him. He had no idea who this director was, but he could sense the danger in the air. There was no turning back now, not after everything that had happened. "I'm getting exactly what I deserve," Thompson said, his voice firm despite the racing thoughts in his head. "I'm here to make sure this doesn't go any further. I'm not afraid of you or your threats." The director's lips twitched into a barely perceptible smile. "You should be, Thompson. You should be very afraid." For a brief moment, the tension between them was unbearable. Thompson felt a surge of fear. Fear for his life, fear for Serena, and most of all, fear for everything he was about to lose. This wasn't just a fight for justice anymore. It was a battle for survival. The director looked over his shoulder at the agent, who nodded and stepped back into the shadows. The director then turned to face Thompson and Serena, his eyes narrowing as he considered them both. "You're in over your heads, but you still have one chance to make this right. Walk away now, and you might just make it out of this alive. Keep pushing, and things will get much worse." Thompson's thoughts were racing. He could feel the weight of the decision bearing down on him. He had come too far to turn back, but he also knew that continuing this fight meant stepping into a world of danger and uncertainty, one where the stakes were higher than he could ever have imagined. Serena spoke before Thompson could reply. "We're not walking away. Not now. Not ever." The director studied her for a long moment, his eyes calculating. Finally, he gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "Very well," he said, his voice cold and final. "But remember this, both of you. You've been warned." As quickly as they had arrived, the director and his agent turned and walked back to the SUV, disappearing into the night. The doors slammed shut behind them, and the sound of the engine revving broke the silence. The car sped off into the distance, leaving Thompson and Serena standing in the alley, stunned and unsure of what came next. Thompson took a deep breath, the reality of the situation settling in. He was in this for the long haul now. There was no turning back, but as he watched the taillights disappear into the night, a sinking feeling gnawed at him. They were being watched. Every move they made would be scrutinized. Every step forward could be their last. And with the director's warning echoing in his mind, Thompson couldn't help but wonder just how much further this rabbit hole went. The night air was colder now, and the sound of the black SUV's engine fading into the distance seemed to leave an unsettling silence in its wake. Thompson stood there, motionless, as the reality of what had just transpired continued to wash over him. His heart still pounded in his chest, but now, the fear had been replaced by something more dangerous, a quiet determination. Serena stood beside him, her eyes still fixed on the spot where the SUV had disappeared. Her face was a mask of composure, but Thompson could see the flicker of uncertainty in her gaze. They had just received a warning from someone who clearly had power and resources beyond anything they had imagined. Thompson took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. What do we do now? Serena's expression hardened, her eyes narrowing as she turned to face him. We move forward, she said, her voice low but firm. We can't stop now. We're too far in. They won't stop coming after us, and if we back down, we lose everything. We have to fight. Thompson's mind was spinning. He knew what she was saying was true. They couldn't afford to back down. Not now. Not when they were so close to uncovering the truth. But the warning from the director, someone clearly tied to the highest levels of power, lingered in his mind. He wasn't just dealing with criminals on the street anymore. They were in the crosshairs of a well-oiled machine, a network of elites who had everything to lose if their secrets came to light. I know, Thompson said, finally speaking his thoughts aloud. But we need a plan. They're watching us. They've already made it clear they can get to us anytime, anywhere. Serena gave a sharp nod. I've been making preparations. I've got contacts, people who can help us, but they're all on the fringes. We can't trust anyone inside the system. Not anymore. Thompson felt a surge of frustration, but it was quickly replaced by resolve. We'll figure it out, he said, his voice more confident than he felt. But we can't go in blind. We need to know everything we can about Blackwell, about this syndicate he's part of. We need evidence. Serena's lips curled into a slight smile, though it was tinged with sadness. That's the problem, Thompson. The evidence is buried so deep that even I can't get to it. Blackwell and his people, they've been covering their tracks for years. But I've got a lead. A small one, but it's something. Thompson raised an eyebrow. A lead? What kind of lead? Serena hesitated for a moment, her gaze flickering to the alley entrance as if expecting someone to appear. She lowered her voice. There's a meeting tomorrow night. A private one. It's not on the official schedule, but I know it's happening. The people Blackwell answers to, they'll be there. If we can get to that meeting, we might be able to hear something important. Something we can use. Thompson felt a jolt of adrenaline. This was the kind of opportunity they had been waiting for. The chance to gather intel, to catch them in the act. But it was also incredibly risky. They were up against a network of people who could make them disappear without anyone noticing. How do you know about this meeting? Thompson asked, narrowing his eyes. Serena's expression softened slightly. I've got sources. People who are fed up with this corruption. They're the ones who've been feeding me the information I've been gathering for months. They want this to stop as much as we do. Thompson wasn't sure whether to trust Serena completely. She had her own agenda, but at least her interests aligned with his for now. They both wanted to expose Blackwell and the syndicate that held the city in its grip. We'll need to move fast, Thompson said, already formulating a plan in his mind. We can't wait around. If we're going to get inside that meeting, we need to make sure we have the right people in place. We need to be prepared for anything. Serena nodded. Agreed. But we have to be smart about it. We'll use the cover of the night. The fewer people who know about this, the better. And we can't trust anyone who's too close to Blackwell. We'll need to go deep underground. Thompson felt the weight of her words. He had been on the streets long enough to know that the deeper you went, the more dangerous things became. There were no easy answers here. But he wasn't turning back now. Let's do it, Thompson said, his voice steady with purpose. Serena glanced over at him, her eyes searching his face for any sign of doubt. But all she saw was determination. Thompson wasn't going to walk away, not after everything that had happened. And he wasn't about to let the people who were pulling the strings continue their reign of fear and manipulation. The next day passed in a blur. Thompson and Serena spent hours preparing, gathering what little intel they could find, and planning their approach. They couldn't risk being too obvious, and they certainly couldn't afford to attract any unwanted attention. But the clock was ticking, and tomorrow night's meeting would be their best, and perhaps only, chance to get the information they needed. As evening fell, Thompson couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. His instincts, honed over years of police work, were on high alert. There was a sense of unease in the air, a feeling that danger was closing in around them, tightening like a noose. Serena seemed to sense it too. You okay? She asked, noticing the tension in his shoulders. Thompson nodded, but the unease in his gut wouldn't go away. I've got a bad feeling about this. It's too quiet. Too many things could go wrong. Serena's eyes softened. We knew it wouldn't be easy, but we have to do this. We don't have any other choice. Thompson looked out the window, his thoughts running a million miles an hour. He wasn't about to back down, but that gnawing feeling of being watched, of being hunted, was growing stronger by the second. Just as he turned back to Serena, his phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. He hesitated for a moment, then answered. Thompson, he said, his voice low. There was a brief pause on the other end, and then a familiar voice spoke, sending a chill down his spine. Don't go to the meeting, Thompson. It was Lieutenant Henderson, and the fear in his voice was unmistakable. What do you mean, don't go? Thompson asked, confused. This is our chance. We need to be there. You don't understand, Henderson said urgently. They know what you're planning. They've been tracking you both. You're walking into a trap. If you go through with this, it will be your last move. Trust me, Thompson. They've already made their move. You're being set up. Thompson felt the blood drain from his face. Everything they had planned, everything they had worked for, was about to unravel. The trap was already in place, and he had no idea how deep it ran. He looked at Serena, her face now a mask of disbelief. What now? Thompson whispered. Henderson's voice came through again, more urgent this time. You need to disappear, Thompson. Now. I'm not the one who can help you anymore. The line went dead. The ground beneath Thompson's feet seemed to shift. Everything he thought he understood was crumbling, and the walls were closing in. The game had changed, and they were no longer playing by the rules. Thompson stood frozen for a moment, staring at his phone. The screen had gone black, but the message was clear. Lieutenant Henderson had just warned him. And now everything he had been working toward felt like it was slipping through his fingers. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fall into place, but the picture it formed was more dangerous than he could have ever imagined. Serena was watching him closely, her brow furrowed. What did he say? She asked, her voice edged with tension. Thompson ran a hand through his hair, trying to process Henderson's cryptic warning. He said we're being set up, that we're walking into a trap. Serena's face fell. I knew it. I felt it in my gut. She paced in a circle, clearly agitated. But why didn't he say anything sooner? Why let us get this far? Thompson clenched his jaw. He didn't have an answer. All he knew was that things had just escalated to a level they couldn't control. The people they were up against, Blackwell's syndicate, were powerful, and they had been watching every move they made. Thompson had known they were being followed. But this was a whole new ballgame. I don't know why he waited, Thompson said, his voice low. But it doesn't matter. We're in it now, and there's no turning back. Serena nodded, her eyes narrowing with resolve. Then we find a way out of this. We can't go to that meeting. If it's a trap, then they'll be expecting us. But we can still find another way to get the information we need. Thompson felt the weight of their situation press down on him. They were up against forces that were playing a game they didn't even fully understand. He glanced at the clock on the wall. It was almost time for the meeting, and despite everything that had happened, he still felt an overwhelming urge to act. What if we turn the tables on them? Thompson asked, his mind racing with possibilities. What if we play them instead? If they're watching us, they'll expect us to bail out. But what if we give them something else to focus on? Serena paused, considering his words. I see what you're saying. If we let them think we're running scared, we can use that as a distraction. But it'll have to be convincing, and we'll have to move fast. Thompson nodded, feeling a spark of determination. It's risky, but it's the only shot we've got. Serena's eyes flickered with a mix of caution and approval. All right, let's make it happen. The plan was simple, but dangerous. Instead of heading directly to the meeting, Thompson and Serena would act like they were going to run, disappear into the shadows, make it seem like they were abandoning their search. They would draw the syndicate's attention away, hoping to confuse their pursuers long enough to get a head start. But it wouldn't be easy. They had to make sure they weren't followed, make sure they didn't lead anyone straight to where they were really going. The next few hours passed in a blur. Thompson and Serena changed their appearances, new clothes, new disguises, and made their way toward the outskirts of the city. They had to stay under the radar. The last thing they needed was to attract attention at a checkpoint or a security camera. Thompson couldn't shake the feeling that every corner they turned, every step they took, was leading them deeper into danger. They were being hunted, and there was no clear way out. As they reached a secluded alley on the outskirts of town, Serena stopped suddenly, looking around carefully. "We need to be quick," she muttered. "We're almost at the rendezvous point, but they're already closing in on us." "I can feel it." Thompson nodded. They had been driving for a while, making several detours to shake off any potential tails. But now, as the night grew darker, he could feel the tension rising. They had to act fast. They approached an old warehouse that was tucked away from the main streets. It looked abandoned, forgotten by most, but it had a hidden entrance, one that only a few trusted allies knew about. The rendezvous point was set. As they approached the warehouse door, Thompson felt his phone buzz in his pocket. He pulled it out, expecting it to be a message from Henderson, or maybe even Blackwell's men trying to reach him. But when he saw the number on the screen, his heart dropped. It was a blocked number, but the message that appeared on the screen sent a chill down his spine. "We know where you are. It's already too late." Thompson's grip tightened on the phone, and he looked up at Serena. "They found us." Serena didn't flinch. Her eyes hardened. "We've got no time to waste. Get in there. Now." Without another word, Thompson pushed open the door to the warehouse and stepped inside. The air inside was stale, but the faint smell of oil and dust gave it a sense of security, like it had been untouched for years. They moved quickly, knowing that time was running out. The warehouse was empty, save for a few crates stacked in the corner and the dim light from a single hanging bulb overhead. Thompson and Serena made their way deeper into the building, where an old office sat, hidden away in the back. This was where they were supposed to meet their contact, someone on the inside who could give them the information they needed about Blackwell's syndicate. But as they reached the door, they paused. Something wasn't right. Thompson felt it before he saw it. A noise, a faint click, echoed in the shadows. His instincts flared, and he grabbed Serena's arm, pulling her back. "Get down," he hissed. It was too late. The lights in the warehouse flickered and then went out, plunging them into total darkness. The sudden silence was deafening. Thompson's heart raced as he reached for his gun, but before he could draw it, a voice echoed through the darkness. "Thought you could run? Huh? You thought we wouldn't find you?" Thompson's breath caught in his throat. The voice was cold, menacing, and unmistakable. It was the director, the man who had been orchestrating everything behind the scenes. "Get them," the director's voice ordered. Thompson's pulse spiked. He didn't need to hear more. They had been set up. The trap had already been sprung, and now they were surrounded. Gunshots rang out in the distance, and Thompson felt a sharp tug on his arm as Serena yanked him toward a side door. "We're not done yet," she said, her voice urgent. "We fight our way out." Thompson barely had time to react. They burst through the door into another hallway, but the sounds of footsteps behind them grew louder, closer. They were trapped. In that moment, Thompson knew one thing for certain. This fight wasn't just about exposing the truth anymore. It was about survival. And if they didn't find a way out of this, they wouldn't live long enough to see the truth come to light. As the sound of heavy footsteps echoed down the hall, Thompson and Serena sprinted forward, praying that there was an exit. Any exit that would lead them to safety. But they both knew deep down, no matter how fast they ran, the walls were closing in, and the syndicate was closing in on them with every passing second. This was it. The final confrontation had begun, and they had no idea who would make it out alive. The sound of footsteps behind them was relentless, like a predator closing in on its prey. Thompson and Serena bolted through the narrow hallway, their breaths coming in quick, shallow gasps. Every corner they turned, every door they pushed open, only seemed to take them deeper into the maze of the abandoned warehouse. How much farther? Thompson gasped, his legs burning from the exertion. His mind was racing, trying to calculate their next move. They couldn't afford to get caught. They had to get out of here. "Not far," Serena answered, her voice tight with strain. "I've got a way out. Just stay close." Thompson could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. The walls were closing in, and he knew they didn't have much time. If the director and his team had already set up an ambush, the only thing left for them was to fight their way out, or die trying. The hallway stretched ahead of them, but just as they rounded the next corner, the sound of footsteps grew louder, closer. The chase was on. "We need to split up," Serena said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'll take the left, you go right. I'll meet you by the back exit." Thompson didn't have time to argue. There was no other option. He nodded quickly, his eyes meeting hers for a split second before they separated. Thompson took the right, his footsteps echoing in the silence. His heart was pounding so loudly it drowned out everything else. His hands were sweaty, his gun tight in his grip, ready for anything. As he moved, he heard the distant sound of doors creaking open, followed by voices, low and menacing. They were getting closer. He rounded another corner, and for a moment, he thought he was in the clear. But then, the unmistakable sound of a door slamming shut from behind him sent a jolt of fear through his spine. They were blocking his escape. Thompson's instincts kicked in. He moved quickly, trying to find another way out. But the warehouse was a maze of corridors and dead ends. Every path he took seemed to lead to another locked door or a blocked-off section of the building. The footsteps behind him grew louder and more numerous. They were closing in on him. He paused for a moment to catch his breath, his mind spinning. He had to find a way to get to Serena. They couldn't be separated now. But the longer he waited, the more dangerous it became. He couldn't afford to be caught off guard. A low voice called from the distance, and Thompson's blood ran cold. It was the director again, his voice cutting through the stillness. "You can run all you want, Thompson, but you won't get far. You're out of your league. This is bigger than you." Thompson clenched his jaw. He didn't need the director's taunts. He needed a way out. Suddenly, a door at the far end of the hallway creaked open. Thompson's eyes locked on it. This was it, his chance. He sprinted toward it, his boots pounding against the concrete floor. But as he neared the door, the sharp sound of footsteps from behind made his heart race. He wasn't going to make it. Just as Thompson reached the door, the sound of gunfire rang out from behind him. The bullet whizzed past him, missing by inches. He ducked instinctively, but the door ahead was locked. He didn't have time to fumble with the lock. He was trapped. A voice echoed through the corridor, cold and unwavering. "End of the line, Thompson." Thompson spun around, his gun raised. But before he could react, two agents appeared in the doorway, their weapons aimed at him. His heart skipped a beat. He was surrounded. There was nowhere to run. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be," one of the agents said, his voice flat. Thompson's grip on his gun tightened. He wasn't about to surrender, not without a fight. Just as the agents took a step forward, ready to make their move, a loud crash erupted from the other side of the building. It was followed by the unmistakable sound of shuffling feet and a voice shouting his name. "Thompson." It was Serena. Thompson's heart leapt. He had no idea how she had gotten so close, but it didn't matter. She was here. The agents turned toward the sound of the disturbance, their attention momentarily diverted. That was all the opening Thompson needed. He dove to the side, narrowly avoiding a second round of gunfire. He fired back, the shots ringing out in the narrow corridor. One of the agents fell, clutching his shoulder, while the other stumbled back, his weapon lowered as he assessed the situation. "Get down," Thompson shouted to Serena as she appeared in the doorway. She didn't hesitate. She ducked and rolled toward him, her eyes locked on the remaining agent. Without another word, the two of them worked together. Thompson fired again, hitting the remaining agent square in the chest. The agent crumpled to the floor, his weapon falling from his grasp. It was over, at least for now. Serena crouched beside Thompson, her breath heavy but steady. "We need to move," she said, urgency in her voice. "They'll be back soon." Thompson nodded, adrenaline still pumping through his veins. He was disoriented, but he knew they couldn't stay here much longer. The danger was far from over. "Where's the exit?" he asked, his eyes scanning the area. Serena pointed to a narrow staircase leading up to a catwalk above them. "That way. The back door is on the other side." Thompson glanced back at the bodies of the agents, then made his decision. "Let's go." They moved quickly, sprinting up the staircase, every step taking them farther away from the agents they had just taken down. The sound of footsteps in the distance told them they weren't alone for long. As they reached the top of the catwalk, Thompson glanced over at Serena. They were almost there, just a little farther. But then, everything seemed to slow down. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up. A figure appeared in the shadows, stepping into the dim light of the warehouse. It was the director. "You think you can escape me?" The director's voice was like ice, cutting through the air. "You've made a mistake. A big one." Thompson's blood ran cold. They hadn't escaped yet. The real battle was just beginning. The director stepped forward, his movements deliberate and calm, as though he was in full control of the situation. Thompson's heart raced, and his instincts screamed at him to run. But there was nowhere to go. He and Serena were cornered now, the catwalk behind them leading to a dead end, and the director was blocking the only other exit. "You're making a big mistake, Director," Thompson said, trying to keep his voice steady. "We've already exposed enough to bring this down. We're not backing down now." The director's lips curled into a cold smile. "You're not the ones in control here, Thompson. You never were. You think you can take down something this massive? You're just pawns. Always have been." Serena's eyes flashed with anger. "You think you can intimidate us? You've had your way for too long. But it's over." The director took another step forward, his hands clasped behind his back. "You've already made your move. But do you understand the consequences? Do you understand what it means to expose the truth when there are people willing to do anything to keep it hidden?" Thompson didn't respond. He couldn't afford to show doubt. They had come too far. This was the moment they had been fighting for, and despite the director's chilling words, Thompson wasn't going to back down now. The director's eyes flicked to Serena and then to Thompson, and for a brief moment, he seemed almost disappointed. "You don't get it, do you? You've already lost. You've crossed a line that can't be uncrossed. And now," his voice trailed off, his gaze turning cold, "now you'll pay the price." Before Thompson could react, the director snapped his fingers, and a few of his remaining agents stepped out from the shadows, their weapons raised. It was over. They were outnumbered and surrounded. But as the agents moved in, something unexpected happened. There was a sudden loud bang, followed by the distinct sound of a door being kicked in. The warehouse was filled with the shouts of armed men. From the shadows, a new group emerged, people Thompson recognized instantly. It was Henderson, his voice barely audible over the chaos, but his presence was unmistakable. "Drop your weapons. Now," Henderson shouted, his tone commanding. The director froze. For the first time, there was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. Henderson had brought reinforcements, people Thompson hadn't expected. They were on his side. The director snarled in frustration, his eyes narrowing at Henderson. "You've betrayed me," he spat. "After everything I've done for you?" Henderson's eyes were steely. "I didn't betray you, Director. I'm stopping you. You've gone too far. You knew what was happening, and you ignored it. Now it's over." The standoff continued for several moments, each side waiting for the other to make a move. The tension was palpable, but then Henderson spoke again, his voice filled with authority. "Thompson, Serena, we're getting you out of here. Now, move." Thompson's mind raced, trying to process what was happening. Henderson had been part of the system, too. He had been tied to the syndicate, but now he was helping them? What had changed? Serena didn't hesitate. She grabbed Thompson's arm and pulled him forward, toward the exit that had been secured by Henderson's men. They moved quickly, the director's enraged shouts echoing behind them. But just as they reached the door, Thompson turned back. He had to know. "Henderson," Thompson called, his voice urgent. "Why now? Why did you help us?" Henderson didn't turn around immediately, but when he did, there was a look of resolve in his eyes. "I didn't want to help you, Thompson. I didn't want to get involved. But when I saw what was really going on, the people he was protecting, the lives that were being destroyed, I couldn't stay quiet anymore." He looked at Thompson for a moment, his gaze steady. "I've been on the inside for years, watching things get worse, but I couldn't bring it to light until now. The director, Blackwell, they're part of something much bigger, and if it weren't for people like you, Thompson, none of us would ever have had the courage to act." Thompson's eyes widened, as he took in Henderson's words. The truth was more complicated than he had ever imagined. Henderson had been a part of the system, yes, but he had always known what was right. And now, that was what mattered. You made the right choice, Thompson said quietly. But there's still so much to do. Henderson nodded, his expression grim. We'll clean up what we can, Thompson. But it won't be easy. People like Blackwell won't go down without a fight. And the fight isn't over yet. With that, Henderson and his men led them through the warehouse and out into the night, where the sound of sirens could be heard in the distance, growing louder with each passing second. The authorities were finally arriving, but there was no guarantee they would get there in time to stop everything. As they climbed into the waiting vehicles, Thompson felt a mix of exhaustion and relief wash over him. The fight had been long, and it wasn't over yet. But for the first time in a long while, he felt like they had a chance. The director was still alive, still dangerous. But he had been exposed, and that was a start. The truth had begun to spread, and it was only a matter of time before more would follow. They drove away into the night, knowing that their actions had set something in motion that could change everything. The web of corruption that had ensnared so many was unraveling, but there were still many more threads to pull. And though Thompson and Serena had no idea what the future would bring, they knew one thing for sure. They weren't finished yet. The fight for justice was just beginning.